Imagine waking up one day and realizing that your entire inner world feels frozen. Not destroyed, not shattered, simply locked in stillness, sealed beneath an invisible sheet of ice. The passions that once set your heart ablaze now feel like distant memories. The dreams that once gave you wings sit quietly in the background, reduced to faint whispers you no longer follow. You go through the motions of daily life, perhaps even smiling, perhaps even successful, but beneath it, all there is a coldness silent, persistent, unmoving. What would it take to break that ice? Franz Kafka once wrote, "A book must be the axe for the frozen sea within us. Not a gentle hand, not a comforting blanket, but an axe. Something sharp, violent, undeniable." Why an axe? By this image of force, destruction, and fracture. Perhaps because Kafka knew what most people spend their whole lives denying, that the greatest danger is not in pain, but in numbness. It is not in being broken, but in becoming frozen. The frozen sea within us is the dullness of conformity, the silence of repressed emotion, the mechanical rhythm of a life where authenticity has been sacrificed for comfort. You feel alive, but not fully. You move, but not freely. You speak, but without depth. And the terrifying part is this: you might not even notice it happening. The freezing is gradual. It begins when you stop asking questions, when you begin repeating the phrases handed down to you, when you allow society's scripts to overwrite the raw, chaotic truths of your inner being. But why would Kafka, who spent most of his life in obscurity, struggling with illness, alienation, and despair, insist on this violent metaphor? Perhaps because he understood that the human psyche does not awaken with gentle nudges. Awakens with rupture. It awakens when something strikes so deep that it shatters the protective ice around the soul, letting the raw waters of feeling and thought surge forth again. Consider this. What if most of what you call yourself is nothing? More than a carefully constructed layer of ice? What if the frozen sea inside you is not the absence of life, but the prison that keeps it contained? And what if the very stories you resist, the unsettling ones, the difficult ones, the ones that do not flatter but disturb you, are the very axes meant to set you free? Here lies the paradox. We say we want peace, comfort, and happiness, yet, when handed such states, we often feel restless, hollow, unsatisfied. Why? Because peace without truth is only sedation. Comfort without meaning is only stagnation. Happiness without struggle is only illusion. Kafka's axe is the reminder that to feel fully alive, you must sometimes endure the pain of breaking. Think about the books, the words, the ideas that have cut you the deepest. Was it not the story that forced you to confront something you had long buried? Was it not the philosophy that tore apart the illusions you once depended on? Was it not the insight that at first felt unbearable, but later became the source of your strength? That is the axe. That is what literature, philosophy, and art are meant to be, not shallow entertainments. Not soothing distractions, but weapons forged to liberate the human spirit from its frozen state. And so we return to the question, if there is indeed a frozen sea within you, what is it made of? Fear? Trauma? Routine? The weight of expectations? And more importantly, will you allow it to remain intact, or will you risk the strike of the axe? Because here is the unsettling truth: to remain frozen is safer, but it is not living. To be broken is terrifying, but it is also the beginning of transformation. The axe hurts, the fracture hurts. But what emerges after the rushing waters of authenticity? Freedom. And self-discovery reminds you that you were never meant to remain a prisoner beneath ice. So let us begin. Let us take this metaphor, this haunting image Kafka left us, and use it as a doorway. Let us ask, why do we freeze? What are the psychological and philosophical roots of this paralysis? What keeps us trapped in numbness? And what does it take, not just in literature, but in life itself, to swing the axe? The mirror of your soul is waiting. The frozen sea is silent. Somewhere the blade has already been sharpened. The frozen sea exists in the first place? Why is it that so many people wander through life half awake, their inner world dulled, their capacity for authenticity numbed. The tragedy of the human condition is not merely that suffering exists, but that people often become anesthetized to their own existence, tolerating numbness as though it were normal. The freezing begins quietly. It is the slow encroachment of external expectations, the silent pressure to conform. The heavy machinery of society pressing against the fragile, unpredictable nature of the individual soul. Every culture has its script, a way of speaking, behaving, and even feeling that is deemed acceptable. Children, in their rawness, resist at first. They are wild, spontaneous, chaotically, laughing one moment, crying the next, curious about everything. But soon, discipline, comparison, and conditioning take hold. Don't cry. Don't ask so many questions. Be like everyone else. And thus the first layers of ice begin to form. Carl Jung spoke of this in his notion of the persona, the mask we wear to fit into society. The persona is necessary. Without it, we cannot function in groups. But the danger comes when the mask hardens into the face itself, when we forget that it is a mask at all. Beneath it are true instincts, desires, and contradictions lie dormant, suppressed beneath social frost. Jung warned that what we suppress does not vanish, it retreats into the unconscious, building pressure, waiting for a moment of eruption. Nietzsche, in his own way, described a similar danger. He saw society as hostile to true individuality, constantly shaping us into the herd. To live authentically meant to break away, to embrace the chaos within, and to create values of one's own. Yet how many dare? Most prefer the safety of the herd, even if it means sacrificing their vitality. Nietzsche's Bermensch was not a superhuman in the literal sense, but one who refused the freezing, one who swung the axe against the numbing weight of conformity. The freezing also has psychological roots in fear. Schopenhauer once remarked that life swings like a pendulum between pain and boredom. Pain shocks us, but boredom dulls us. The frozen sea is boredom crystallized, the absence of intensity, the refusal to risk, the avoidance of pain. To feel deeply is dangerous. It invites suffering, heartbreak, and loss. So instead, people settle for safety. They remain in relationships that do not nourish them. They stay in jobs that drain their spirit, consume endless distractions, social media feeds, television, shallow entertainment, hoping the noise will cover the silence beneath. But silence cannot be drowned forever. Viktor Frankl, the Holocaust survivor and psychiatrist, saw this frozen numbness up close. In the camps, he observed that those who survived were not necessarily the strongest, but those who found meaning, even in suffering. Without meaning, life froze into despair. With meaning, even pain could be endured. He concluded that man's deepest drive is not pleasure, as Freud suggested, nor power, as Adler argued, but meaning. Yet modern society has grown increasingly allergic to meaning. It demands efficiency, consumption, productivity, but rarely depth. The result? An epidemic of inner frost. Consider also the biological perspective. Neurologically, our brains are wired for survival, not truth. The default mode network, responsible for self-referential thinking, often traps us in loops of habit and self-deception. Cognitive biases reinforce the frozen state. Status quo bias keeps us from change. Confirmation bias blinds us to new perspectives. And hedonic adaptation dulls the excitement of even our greatest achievements. The mind protects itself from the discomfort of rupture by reinforcing the ice. But here lies the philosophical problem. If our biology, our society, and even our own psychology conspire to keep us frozen, or are we doomed to remain beneath the ice, convincing ourselves that numbness is normal? Perhaps this is why Kafka insisted on the axe. He knew that polite words and gentle encouragement cannot unfreeze the soul. The structures holding us in place are too strong, too deeply embedded. What we need is rupture, an encounter with something so raw, so true, that it shakes us out of our habitual sleep. This is what literature at its highest form does. It refuses to comfort. It refuses to flatter. It disturbs. It unsettles. It breaks. Think of Dostoevsky's Notes from Underground. which strips away the illusions of rational progress and confronts us with the raw, irrational depths of the human psyche. Or Huxley's Brave New World, where comfort has replaced meaning, and society thrives on sedation rather than authenticity. These are axes, not lullabies. They do not soothe. They demand awakening. The roots of the frozen sea, then, lie in a conspiracy of forces: the social demand for conformity, the psychological tendency toward repression, the philosophical evasion of suffering, and the biological inclination toward safety. Together, they build the prison of numbness, layer by layer, until the sea within is locked in ice. But if this is true, then the next question follows. Left untouched. What happens when the frozen, unseen consequences of refusing to pick up the axe? Because while ice feels safe, it is not without cost. Beneath the frozen surface, waters are building pressure. Beneath the silence, screams remain unheard. Beneath the numbness, the soul still longs to move, to flow, to live. And when ice holds too long, something eventually cracks, not always by choice, and not always in ways we can control. And so, as we move deeper, we must ask, what is the price of remaining frozen? What hidden damage does it cause to our lives, our relationships, and our society? What unseen consequences are already shaping us without our awareness? What happens when the ice is never shattered? What becomes of a life where the sea within is left untouched, buried beneath layers of frost? At first glance, nothing seems wrong. People carry on, perform their duties, and maintain appearances. From the outside, their lives appear orderly, respectable, even enviable. But look closer, and a different reality emerges. An invisible erosion. A quiet decay that eats away at the very core of being. The most immediate consequence is a loss of vitality. A frozen sea does not move. It is static, lifeless, resistant to flow. And so, too, the person whose inner world has frozen becomes rigid. Their days blur into each other. They wake, they work, they consume, they sleep. Repetition replaces growth. Habit replaces passion. It is not that they are miserable. In fact, misery might at least signal life. No, they are something worse. Numb. This numbness seeps into relationships. But when the sea within is frozen, empathy grows shallow. How can one truly feel another's pain or joy when they themselves are insulated against feeling? Conversations become functional exchanges rather than soulful connections. Love, instead of being an electric force that awakens, becomes routine. A series of gestures performed out of duty rather than genuine intensity. Families remain intact, friendships endure, but the warmth has been replaced by habit. This is the quiet tragedy of emotional frost, not the loss of connection, but the imitation of it. On a broader scale, the frozen sea breeds conformity. People whose inner worlds are numbed are easier to control, easier to manipulate. They do not ask dangerous questions. They do not rebel against meaningless routines, accept mediocrity because mediocrity feels safe. Aldous Huxley foresaw this in Brave New World, a society that avoids suffering by drowning itself in pleasure, distraction, and comfort. The citizens of his dystopia did not fight against tyranny because they were too anesthetized to care. Their frozen seas made them content with cages. Psychologically, the consequences are subtle but devastating. Suppression does not erase. Jung warned that the contents of the unconscious, the shadow, always seek expression. When the frozen self is ignored, it returns in distorted forms: anxiety, depression, addiction, compulsions. The ice cracks not in moments of conscious awakening, but in eruptions of crisis. The man who has ignored his dissatisfaction for years suddenly sabotages his own life. The woman who has numbed her desires finds herself consumed by unexplained despair. The young adult who has lived under parental and societal expectations explodes in rebellion or collapses into apathy. Cognitive science supports this. Suppression of emotion activates the body's stress systems. Chronic repression can manifest as physical illness, hypertension, immune dysfunction, chronic fatigue. The frozen sea, then, is not merely metaphorical. It reshapes the body itself. The cost of numbness is written into the flesh, but perhaps the most chilling consequence is existential, the erosion of meaning. When the sea within is frozen, time itself becomes strange. Moments no longer feel alive, but blur into sameness. Its days feel both endless and empty. This is the realm Sartre described as nausea, the overwhelming recognition of existence stripped of depth. Or consider Camus' absurd. Life appears repetitive, meaningless, yet inescapable. Without rupture, without the axe, one begins to question silently. Why continue at all? This existential vacuum often hides beneath success. A person may achieve wealth, status, even admiration, and yet feel an unshakable hollowness. Viktor Frankl observed this in his Patience after the war. Those who lacked meaning often fell into despair even in comfort. The frozen sea is cruel in this way. It can coexist with external achievement, allowing one to succeed outwardly while dying inwardly. And then there are the societal consequences. A population of frozen individuals produces a frozen culture. Art loses its bite and becomes entertainment. Philosophy is dismissed as impractical. Politics devolves into spectacle, driven not by truth but by distraction. The collective spirit drifts toward consumption, efficiency, and distraction, avoiding anything that demands depth. In such a society, even tragedy becomes a performance quickly forgotten in the next news cycle. This is why Kafka's warning matters. He did not write stories of comfort, but of estrangement, alienation, and absurdity. His characters live in frozen realities, bureaucracies that crush individuality, absurd trials without meaning, endless waiting without resolution. His world mirrors ours, and in that mirror, we see the cost of leaving the ice intact. The irony is that the frozen sea often masquerades as stability. To remain numb feels safe, predictable, even responsible. Parents advise their children to choose security over passion. Employers reward compliance over creativity. Communities praise conformity over authenticity. The person who quietly accepts this path may be admired for their discipline, their responsibility, their steadiness. But what is admired is also what imprisons. Safety becomes suffocation. And here lies the paradox. The longer the ice remains untouched, the more dangerous it becomes to break it. Years of suppression harden the surface. And rupture finally comes. It may arrive not as liberation, but as destruction, midlife crises, breakdowns, self-sabotage. The axe that could have liberated becomes the crack that shatters. The question is not whether the ice has consequences, but how long we can afford to ignore them. What price are we willing to pay for the illusion of safety? What are we sacrificing? In the name of stability? How much of our humanity are we willing to trade for numbness? The frozen sea does not announce its damage in loud catastrophe, at least, not at first. Its danger lies in subtle erosion, in the quiet theft of vitality, in the silent hollowing of meaning. It leaves you alive but unawakened, breathing but not living, surrounded but profoundly alone. And so the next question rises, sharper than ever. If numbness is this destructive, if conformity and repression hollow us out, then how do we resist? How do we dare to pick up the axe? How can we break free from the ice without destroying ourselves in the process? The answer lies in rebellion, not chaos for its own sake, but the radical act of reclaiming one's inner fire. To rebel is to risk, to choose authenticity over safety, to swing against the ice even when society tells you to let it be. But rebellion requires more than anger. It requires clarity, courage, and vision. Imagine standing before the frozen sea inside you, axe in hand. The surface is vast, intimidating, stretching endlessly in every direction. The ice is thick, cold, unyielding. Part of you wonders, what if it's safer to leave it untouched? If striking it will only unleash chaos I cannot control? This hesitation is natural. To rebel against numbness, against the silent pull of conformity, is terrifying. Yet rebellion in its truest form is not about destruction for its own sake. It is about awakening. It is about choosing the risk of being alive over the safety of being frozen. The rebellion begins with awareness. You must first recognize the ice for what it is. This sounds simple, but it is not. Most people deny their numbness. They mask it with distractions, scrolling endlessly, consuming entertainment, clinging to routines. But to pause, to sit in silence, and to admit, I am frozen, this is the first crack in the surface. Carl Jung warned that until we make the unconscious conscious, it will rule our lives and we will call it fate. Awareness, then, is the first rebellion against fate. But awareness alone is not enough. To break free requires action. And action means risk. Nietzsche spoke of the necessity of risk in becoming who we are. The one who refuses risk remains chained to mediocrity. To rebel is to step deliberately into uncertainty, to strike at the ice even when you cannot predict what lies beneath. There are many forms of rebellion, and each person's axe looks different. For some, it is the courage to speak truths long buried, to confront the lies they've told themselves. For others, it is the act of creating, painting, writing, building not for applause, but for authenticity. For others still, rebellion may mean leaving behind roles, identities, relationships that no longer serve the growth of the soul. Every rebellion carries a cost, but the greater cost is silence. History gives us countless examples of this rebellion. Consider Socrates, who chose death over betraying his inner truth. Consider Dostoevsky, who endured prison and exile yet transformed suffering into some of the most profound explorations of the human soul. Consider Kafka himself, who, despite alienation and despair, wrote works that still strike like axes a century later. Their lives remind us that rebellion is rarely comfortable, but it is always transformative. Yet rebellion does not always need to be dramatic. Sometimes the greatest act of rebellion is the smallest. To feel deeply in a world that numbs, to think critically in a world that distracts, to remain authentic in a world that rewards masks. Even the choice to read a book that unsettles you, rather than one that merely entertains, is a strike of the axe. Even the act of facing your own shadow, the parts of yourself you would rather deny, is rebellion against the ice. But how do you strike without shattering yourself? The danger of awakening is real. If the axe falls without preparation, the floodwaters of the unconscious may overwhelm you. Jung warned of this. Transformation requires balance. To rebel effectively, one must cultivate strength, clarity, and support. Viktor Frankl discovered this in the camps. It was not rebellion against suffering itself that saved people, but rebellion through meaning, the refusal to let suffering dictate the terms of existence. The rebellion must be guided by vision. Ask yourself, what is the truth I have been avoiding? What is the life I would live if I were unafraid? What would authenticity demand of me now? These are dangerous questions, but they are also liberating. The ice cracks where honesty is most intense. And there is another paradox. Rebellion is not only about breaking, it is also about creating. The axe does not exist to leave destruction, but to make space for movement, for water, for flow. When the frozen sea cracks, what emerges is not chaos, but possibility. The rebellion frees the currents of your being, letting them carve new paths, new meanings, new lives. To rebel is to write your own scripture, to compose your own song, to tell your own story. It is to stand against the inertia of culture and declare, I will not be a replica. I will not be frozen. I will live as if my existence matters. Sartre insisted that existence precedes essence, that we are condemned to be free. To rebel, then, is to embrace this freedom, however terrifying, and to use it to shape a life that is truly yours. But rebellion is not a one-time event. It is a practice, a rhythm, a way of being. The ice does not crack once and vanish forever. It reforms, creeping back with every compromise, every surrender to convenience, every betrayal of authenticity. The rebellion must be renewed daily. Each day asks, will you choose the axe, or will you let the ice harden again? This is not easy. but no one ever promised it would be. Kafka did not offer comfort, he offered a weapon. Nietzsche did not offer peace, he offered a call to become who you are. Jung did not offer certainty, he offered confrontation with the shadow. All of them understood the same truth. To live authentically is to risk. To refuse risk is to freeze. So ask yourself now, what would rebellion look like in your life? What is the single strike you have avoided out of fear? Which truths are you ready to speak? Which desires are you ready to admit? Which illusions are you ready to abandon? These are not abstract questions. They are the questions that decide whether you remain imprisoned or whether you break free. And yet there is still a deeper truth. Rebellion frees you, yes. But beyond freedom lies something greater, something that transforms not just the ice, but the sea itself. For even when the axe has shattered the surface, even when the waters flow, there remains one last revelation, one ultimate truth about what it means to be alive. The ice has cracked. The waters move. The rebellion has begun. But there is one final question. What is all of this for? Why break the frozen sea at all? Why risk the pain, the disorientation, the chaos of transformation? The answer is not freedom alone. Freedom, though precious, is not the end. Freedom is a doorway. What lies beyond that doorway is the truth, the ultimate realization that life, in all its suffering and absurdity, is still sacred, still meaningful, still yours to shape. Imagine this. You stand now on the shore of your own inner sea, no longer frozen, no longer silent. The water flows freely, reflecting moonlight and storm alike. You realize something astonishing. The ice was never your enemy. It was your teacher. It preserved you until you were ready to awaken. It forced you to choose, to take up the axe, to face yourself. Without the ice, there would be no rebellion. Without numbness, there would be no awakening. What once felt like a prison now reveals itself as paradoxically necessary, the very condition that led to your liberation. Here lies the deepest truth. The axe is not meant to destroy the sea. It is meant to reveal it. The goal is not to escape your inner depths, but to enter them. The frozen sea within you holds everything you are, your shadow and your light, your despair and your longing, your past wounds and your future possibilities. When the ice breaks, you encounter the full magnitude of your being. And this encounter, raw and unfiltered, is what it means to be alive. Nietzsche called this amor fati, the love of fate. Not just acceptance, but love of all that is shaped. You, even the suffering, even the numbness, even the years of ice. Because without them, the sea would not be what it is. And without them, you would not be who you are. This is the revelation. The frozen sea, the axe, the fracture, the flood, all of it is part of the same dance. You are not here merely to avoid pain or seek pleasure. You are here to experience the totality of existence, to confront the depths of the self, to awaken to the miracle that you exist at all. Kafka's words take on new light. A book must be the axe for the frozen sea within us. A book, yes, but also a conversation, a love, a loss, a moment of silence, a sudden tragedy, an unexpected joy. The axe takes many forms. Sometimes it is literature. Sometimes it is suffering. Sometimes it is love. Sometimes it is death. Every strike is painful, but every strike reminds you that you are alive. The ultimate truth, then, is not simply to break the ice, but to live with the seed, to let it move, to let it storm, to let it calm, to let it reflect. Life is not about constructing walls against the depths, but about daring to swim in them. To live fully is to say yes to the terror, to the beauty, to the uncertainty, to the absurdity. Sartre was right. We are condemned to be free. But Camus was also right in the face of absurdity. We can still choose to imagine Sisyphus happy, pushing his stone not in despair but in defiance, in creativity, in meaning. And so the axe once feared becomes sacred. Every book that unsettles you, every experience that shakes you, every truth that breaks you, they are not enemies, but gifts. They are the cracks through which light enters. They are the fractures that reveal the flow. They are the reminders that numbness is not your destiny. Ask yourself now, what will you do with your sea? Will you let it refreeze, satisfied with one strike of the axe? Or will you remain vigilant, breaking the ice again and again, each time allowing yourself to grow deeper, freer, more alive? This is not a one-time awakening, but a lifelong practice. Every day offers you a choice: silence or expression, numbness or vitality, conformity or authenticity. And if you fear the ice returning, remember this: the axe is always within reach. Sometimes it takes the form of a question you can no longer ignore. Sometimes it is a work of art that unsettles you. Sometimes it is the gaze of another human being who sees you more clearly than you see yourself. The axe is everywhere, waiting. The only question is, will you pick it up? Imagine one final scene. You stand once more at the edge of the abyss, but this time the sea within is not frozen. It moves beneath you, alive, mysterious, infinite. The moonlight dances on its surface, revealing both darkness and brilliance. You understand finally that this abyss is not your enemy. It is your essence. It is the place where your freedom, your suffering, your love, your despair, and your hope all meet. And as you gaze into it, you no longer feel paralyzed. You feel awe. This is the ultimate truth. To live is to risk the axe again and again, so that the sea within never freezes. To live is to embrace the flood. To live is to face yourself fully, even when it hurts. And in doing so, to discover that the very pain of awakening is also the proof that you are alive. The axe is struck, the ice is shattered, the sea flows, and for the first time you realize it was never meant to be otherwise.